Welcome, members of the Electoral College. Vote to choose Joe Biden as the next president of the United States, while at the same time healthcare workers receive a shot in the arm in the battle against the coronavirus pandemic. Hi, everyone. I'm Sean Calebs, filling in today for Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. Well, nearly 6 weeks after Americans voted to elect Joe Biden as the next president, the Electoral College has now made it official. It is largely a procedural process that in the past has gone unnoticed until now, because President Trump is refusing to concede, alleging voter fraud and launching a number of lawsuits to overturn the results with no success. Meanwhile, early voting has started in the state of Georgia for 2 Senate runoff races that will determine which party will control the U.S. Senate. And COVID-19 vaccinations are underway as the U.S. reaches another grim milestone. There are now more than 300,000 deaths in the United States. We will get to all of that in a minute, but first I want to go to CGTN's White House correspondent Nathan King. And Nathan, the Electoral College just voted to elect Joe Biden as president. What are the next steps before the inauguration?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned, Sean, good to see you again, by the way, that this is normally unnoticed, because normally we wouldn't be watching this on TV because the votes that happen November 3rd would just be translated to the Electoral College. But as you know, this is not normal times. Now, the Electoral College has essentially voted now in every state that matters. Joe Biden is essentially the president-elect. But there is one more thing to watch out for at the moment, and that is January 6th. That is when a joint session of the current Congress comes into session and basically will, if you like, okay the results of the Electoral College. Now, very rarely do they say anything. In fact, they just essentially rubber stamp it. But what happens is the vice president, Mike Pence, who of course is the president of the Senate, will open the envelopes, if you like, in a sort of game show way, and basically read out the results. Now, any senator or congressperson can actually say no to that, and then they go off and debate it for 2 hours. That's going to be very interesting to watch, especially now, because the Electoral College have essentially said Joe Biden is going to be president, something we've known for weeks. But remember, last week, over 120 Republican congressmen, a majority of the Republicans in the House, joined that Texas lawsuit that sought to basically overturn 4 states' votes to the Supreme Court that went for Democrats. An incredibly brazen move with no legal standing as the Supreme Court happened. So the thing to watch now is whether Republican congressmen and senators say, look, it's over, Mr. President. Joe Biden is going to be sworn in on January the 20th around midday, just a few hundred meters from here at the Capitol, and then be in here in the White House.
And you talk about Mike Pence, arguably nobody more loyal to President Trump than Pence, but also we got to talk about Bill Maher, who just announced he is going to be resigning as of December 23rd. Firstly, what about the timing of this? Because this comes at the exact time that the Electoral College is putting its stamp on making Biden the next president of the United States. And secondly, there's been some speculation that even Barr has been pushed too far, with Trump saying this election has been a fraud. It has been rigged.
Well, I mean, let's not necessarily take the Twitter that we just saw from Donald Trump as totally true, that Bill Maher is leaving next week to spend more time with his family. We've heard that in politics across the world. And you're absolutely right. Bill Maher has been a staunch defender of the president up until the last couple of weeks or so. Remember his interpretation of the Mueller report after redacting large portions of it really set the public tone for that. He has basically pushed back on everything. Pushed forward, rather, everything the president has asked him to do in an incredibly loyal way. However, in recent weeks, he has said that there is no evidence of any widespread fraud that could have changed the election results. He has also apparently did not tell the president there was some sort of investigation into Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, when it came to his tax affairs, and that was not announced before the election. Remember, the Republicans tried to push the Hunter Biden, son of Joe Biden, to try and swing the election their way. The president was very, very disappointed at that. But Bill Maher in his resignation letter says, look, the president's been under attack, I remain loyal, etc., etc. But why is he resigning now when there's only a few weeks left in the Trump presidency? Well, maybe you're right, and we can only speculate at the moment that he will not go any further. And after the Supreme Court decision over the weekend, essentially it's over. But any interference now would be very, very dodgy for anyone who's not the president. Because remember, there could be charges brought if you try and interfere in an election. And I'm sure Bill Maher wants to keep his reputation, especially with Republicans, although that may be damaged by what Trump has tweeted and tweets in the coming days.
It's going to be interesting. Nathan King for us at the White House. Thanks very much. A busy Monday. Now let's bring in our panel to discuss all of this. Joining us from New York, Amy Holmes. She's a journalist and writer for HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher. Eric Bolling joins us from Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, one of my favorite cities. He is the host of America This Week. And joining us from Atlanta, Rashad Richey is the host of Rashad Richey Morning Show and editor-at-large of Rolling Out magazine. And with us here in Washington, Katie Barlow, a lawyer and co-founder and editor of DC Circuit Breaker. Welcome to all of you. A lot to discuss. Katie, let's start with you. We just heard Nathan kind of spell out what's going to happen, usually rubber stamp. Everybody is watching what's going on in the Electoral College. Why is that? And is this the last gasp, do you think?
It's absolutely the last gasp. We have now seen over 50 different lawsuits fail across the United States, trying to overturn the election. Most recently, last week, we saw the Texas challenge fail in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court agreed across the board that one single state cannot challenge the election's procedures and results in 4 other battleground states. So at this point, there are no more avenues. The electoral votes are in. There are no more challenges to make. And for that matter, there's no evidence that will survive any sort of legal threshold, which has been consistently the problem in the past few weeks. There's just no evidence of widespread voter fraud, a point that Attorney General Barr has pointed out to the president, much to his dismay.
Rashad, I want you to pick up on that. The last gasp, but look, January 6th, the president of the Senate, Vice President Trump, arguably nobody more loyal to Trump than Pence, is going to have to be the one who reads everything that the Electoral College did and basically puts the final stamp on this election. Do you think anything's going to happen that day?
Yeah, I think he's going to accept the results. And I think that's the reason why Pence has not been as vocal as Trump as it relates to this voter fraud false narrative, because he knows that ultimately he will have to eat those words and actually accept the results, part of his performance as Vice President of the United States. And I do find it ironic that while we're talking about this being a constitutional democracy, the individuals who would typically be all for the Constitution are the very ones agreeing to violate the Constitution. I'm not as concerned about Trump. He's going to be out of power January 20th, and he's simply going to make noise on Twitter after that. What I'm concerned about are the 130 plus members of Congress. I'm concerned about the 18 states who decided to side against the will of the voter in a functioning democracy and say they are willing to overturn what the people have said if they could get away with it. Those are the individuals we will have to contend with even after Trump is no more.
Amy, pick up on that. Talk about those members of Congress. And also recent studies show that only about 25% of GOP voters believe that this election was fair and just.
And Democrats back in 2016 thought that the results were unfair when it came to Hillary Clinton. And there was plenty of polling data that showed Democratic voters thought even that the Russians had meddled in voting machines. I think what we're really hearing here is the last gasp of media hysteria over Donald Trump. Here's a spoiler alert for your viewers. The Electoral College members were going to vote today the way they did because the Supreme Court ruled with no dissent that Electoral College members cannot vote. They cannot be faithless electors. They had no choice but to follow their state's own guidelines for casting those votes. So for all of the drama, what are they going to do? How is Trump going to react and so forth? The outcome was already preordained. And now we're going to see between now and Joe Biden's inauguration, which Mitch McConnell, the Republican Senate Majority Leader, currently, although that may change after January 5th, he said that he fully expected that Joe Biden will be inaugurated. Again, all that we're going to be seeing between now and Joe Biden's inauguration is more media-contrived drama, aided and abetted, of course, by Donald Trump and also, partisan Republicans who also want to grab the spotlight and appeal to their constituents. But all of this is happening as the calendar has, dictated, and we will have a new president in the new year, and we will move on.
Eric, do you think it's really driven by the media? Because I want to pick up on one thing Karl Rove said over the weekend, the man who has been called the architect for the GOP victory for George W. Bush. He came out over the weekend and said that Americans don't like sore losers and said Trump is a sore loser. Is it time for Trump to just move on?
Well, he said Trump is bordering on becoming a sore loser. And by the way, Karl Rove is no friend of Donald Trump. Karl Rove is an establishment Republican. There is Trump Republicans and there are establishment Republicans, and they're by no means seeing eye to eye on this. I think what happened was the door was shut when the Supreme Court rejected the idea of taking up voter fraud as a widespread problem that may have changed the election. Remember, 3 Trump appointees are on that same Supreme Court. That's when the door was shut. And Amy's right. The media has taken that ball and run with the outrage because it brings eyeballs. I've been a friend of Donald Trump for the better part of 20 years. He called me about 5 nights ago. I was driving home. I got home. I spoke to him, and he told me he wasn't quitting. He didn't tell me he thought he was going to win. He told me he wasn't quitting. He also told me he thought the election was stolen from him, which I think a lot of Trump people do. And here's the reason why I'm bringing this up. Going forward, Rashad is completely wrong about this. Donald Trump doesn't lose his power on January 20th when Joe Biden is sworn in. Donald Trump he goes from king to kingmaker. Everyone on the right that wants to be in politics has to go through Trump world to get the blessing of Donald Trump, or they will never win. Personally, I don't think there's going to be another Republican president in my lifetime.
Rashad, firstly, that's a big statement, not another GOP president in your lifetime. But Rashad, I want you to pick up on what Eric just said. Being the kingmaker, perhaps being down in Florida somewhere, having those loyal to him follow every tweet. We saw what happened in Washington this weekend. Thousands of people turning out saying, stop the steal. He's still going to have a lot of juice.
Well, let me first say this in my defense. I was absolutely correct in the fact that Trump would no longer be in power as it relates to governance. He would not be the president of the United States, and some of the power that he exerts over those who are currently in political office, he will not have that same amount of power. I do agree that he will be a kingmaker of sorts. And let me put it this way. If he was the actual kingmaker with this unlimited power that he had when he first got elected, right, you wouldn't have 2 runoffs in the state of Georgia. You would not have a defeat in states that have been considered Republican states for decades. You now have a president who's not only a lame duck president, but a lame duck president who lost solidly Republican states. And because of his failed leadership and because of his inability to be a kingmaker, he has 2 U.S. senators in trouble who were incumbents in a southern state that was a red state.
He doesn't have any U.S. senators in trouble. He doesn't have any U.S. senators in trouble. Both of those seats are going to go Republican. He becomes a kingmaker.
Well, they were in trouble. They were
Watch
in the runoff.
how big his personality. Watch how big he becomes after January 20th. Now, he will be the biggest media personality on the planet. When Joe Biden is president, by the way, watch everyone's ratings tank, because it is going to be a boring next 4 years if you're focusing on the White House.
A lot of people would take boring right now.
I guarantee those cameras will be focused on Mar-a-Lago or wherever the heck Trump is going to be the next day, because he still is, he still commands that, and people will continue to follow.
Katie, is that going to be a big mistake if the media just follows Trump down to Florida?
Yes, I think a couple of things are on the table here. First, I'm not sure that both of those seats are going to go Republican. I've actually been on the ground in Georgia reporting on that race. I was born and raised in that state, and a few interesting things are happening on the ground there, and it is certainly not a given that particularly Senator Loeffler will win her race. She's down 7 points in a Survey USA poll, a poll that was reliable in the days leading up to November 3rd. But if the media does follow President Trump after the January 20th inauguration down to Florida, it will be interesting to see who, as kingmaker, he appoints as his cast of characters that will follow him in the Republican Party. Even today, media reports were showing that he was already hedging about continuing to run in 2024, saying that he'll reassess in 2 years and see if that's even interesting to him or if he thinks he can win. So they'll follow him, but then they need to keep an eye on who he appoints the relevant cast of characters going into the 2022-2024 election.
Can I just show you how important Donald Trump will be over the next 4 years? Fox News lost about 20% of their audience when they did what the MAGA people felt was a disservice to the president. They lost 20%. Other people are trying to grasp those eyeballs right now. It'll be the same thing. If you want to win as a Republican and you have to defeat a liberal Democrat, the only way you're going to get the votes is by having the Trump people behind you, as well as the establishment mainstream media right-wingers as well. Trump will hold the keys to anyone who wants to be in politics going forward on the right.
That's true, and that's actually playing out in Georgia right now.
Hang on, yeah, Amy, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that Eric is right when it comes to the Republican Party. When I hear journalists and pundits say, "Oh, Republicans are afraid of Trump," they're not afraid of Trump. They're respectful of Trump's enormous popularity and enormous pull with his constituents. Let's remember, he had an historic turnout for amongst voters in just this past election. Was able to gain among minority voters, LGBTQ voters, even Muslim voters in ways that were unheard of before, and certainly no one predicted when it would come to Donald Trump. But to Eric's point about the media, that I think is of a lot more concern, at least to me as somebody who is a journalist and follows this closely, is how the media has debased and degraded itself with its constant hysteria and focus on Donald Trump. And I don't see that. I see it abating somewhat because he won't be in the White House, but you can bet that the media is going to be reporting on every tweet, every burp, every press release from Mar-a-Lago, and then demanding that Republicans in Washington, D.C. respond to it. Are you with Trump on this? Are you against Trump on that? In a way that they never, ever do with Democrats. Meanwhile, you have the Hunter Biden scandal erupting when the media told us that it was either not a story or didn't matter. And it turns out he is under investigation by the DOJ for all sorts of potentially alleged, misdeeds when it comes to his business dealings, as well as Joe Biden's brother. Is the media going to focus on this? Are we going to see a push for a special counsel? Are we then going to see even possibly like ginning up charges amongst House members for possible, violations of law by Biden family members? I don't think so, and I think that does the American voter a huge disservice, and why so many Americans do not trust the media. They don't trust the media's reporting, and they don't trust the media's priorities.
And Eric, let's pick up on what you said earlier. A lot of people leaving Fox News and going to news outlets that are even more conservative. What does Trump do once he runs out of things to say about it was a rigged election or it was a fraudulent race? Where does he focus his attention?
He'll never give up on that. Sean, why would he ever do that? He'll stay with that. He'll continuously tease whether he's going to run in 24.
Is that healthy?
He'll play that kingmaker role. Well, I don't know if it's healthy, but the man is a media magnet. He knows how to command the camera and the interest of people who love him, people who hate him, and sometimes even people who are indifferent. They just can't not watch the guy. There's a lot of money in that. There's a lot of juice in that. There's a lot of power in that. And let's be honest, he's a friend of mine for a long time. He gets off on all of those things. Those are all things that probably most of us in front of these cameras would get off on. He's very savvy that he will continue to command the spotlight going forward because it's very, very, very lucrative on many levels.
Let's talk about the runoff, Katie, if you will, coming up in early January in Georgia. A lot of GOP faithful down in Georgia are simply fed up with the way this is played out. A lot of them are vowing to stay away from the polls. Do you think, A, that will happen? And secondly, talk about the two GOP candidates. What happened to them? How did they begin slipping in the polls?
So first, I've done a lot of reporting in the past couple of weeks down in Georgia, and I actually haven't spoken to any Republican voter who plans to not show up to the polls on January 5th. Everyone is still planning to show up. A few folks are upset about it. They're angry that the two Senate candidates are not strongly enough supporting President Trump and his attempts to overturn the results in Georgia's election from November 3rd. But the two candidates themselves, one is a one-term senator who's known very well as a native Georgian, that's Senator Perdue, and then there's Senator Kelly Loeffler, who moved to the state in 2002. She's new to the political scene. She's only been in office for a year, and she's still introducing herself to the voters. She's painting herself as extremely conservative, taking the endorsements of conservatives and QAnon supporter Congresswoman-elect Marjorie Taylor Greene, and she's strongly aligning herself with Trump. But it's not enough yet on the ground. A number of voters are planning to go to the polls to vote for Senator Perdue, but not Senator Loeffler, which makes sense of why she's trailing in the polls, while Senator Perdue is tied with his opponent, John Ossoff.
Rashad, let's talk about how important this is coming up. I mean, this could really dictate if Biden has a successful 4 years or if he struggles, at least for the first 2 years in office. I want to talk about the people of color voting. Clearly, a lot of African Americans are going to go Democratic, but what about Asians and Hispanic voters?
Well, it seems as if in Georgia, those gains are being picked up there as well. Let's be very clear about what's happening in the state. You do have a split in the Republican Party. You have the governor of Georgia, who's now at odds with President Donald Trump. You have conservative leaders like Attorney Lynn Wood going around holding rallies, telling other Republicans, don't vote until they change the machines. Here's what's ironic. Republicans are saying that this is a rigged election, that November was a rigged election because of the machines. You got the same machines. They're also saying it was a rigged election because of the election officials. You got the same election officials. They're saying it was a rigged election in November because of the chief elections officer named Raffensperger. Raffensperger is still the chief elections officer. Republicans are hurting Republicans, and that's why I believe that Warnock and Ossoff, they have an opportunity here to do something that has never been done before, to defeat two incumbent U.S. senators in what was called a solidly Republican state. And you're going to see those numbers continue to trend in the direction, I believe, of both Ossoff and Warnock because of the excitement around making sure Biden and Harris as a ticket in governance have the tools they need to implement the policies they campaigned on.
Eric, before we move on and talk about COVID-19, I want to give you the last word on this runoff coming up.
Thank you, Sean, because I see it completely differently. I think the reason why you're going to see at least a Perdue, and remember, the Republicans only need one of those two seats to retain control of the Senate. I think they're going to retain control because of some of the policies that they've already started to talk about. And when I say they, I mean Bernie Sanders saying when Joe Biden is in office, we will move him to the progressive left. Or AOC saying when Joe Biden is in office, she's going to push her green agenda, which could cost hundreds of trillions of dollars. I mean, whether it is or not, the American people and the people from Georgia, which is typically a red state, won't let Biden have the House, the Senate, and the White House. It's just, in my opinion, it's not going to happen. I think Kelly Loeffler's at risk. I agree with Katie, but I think David Perdue is in a very strong position to win that seat.
You know, Eric, I'm still trying to digest the fact you said we're not going to see another GOP president in your lifetime. But let's move on to COVID-19 first. Katie, look, everybody's been talking about this for the entire year. It has been a brutal year. I don't know anybody who hasn't suffered through this year. And any other day, we would be talking about the fact there are now 300,000 people in the United States who have died because of this pandemic. What do you think people are talking now about in terms of the vaccine? Is there going to be pushback from people taking it? And obviously, you need to get that in the hands of the first responders as well as those most vulnerable, firstly.
All of the voters that I've talked to, that is absolutely front of mind. Both Democrats and Republicans are concerned about moving past this virus, getting the vaccine out. Everyone that I've spoken to is willing to take it and wants to move forward and wants it quickly. We heard today from Dr. Fauci that Americans who don't have any outstanding conditions that would put them front of the line will start to receive the vaccine in late March and early April, which put us maybe on a track toward a more normal American life in midsummer. And I think that's front of mind for everyone at this point, for voters that are voting down in Georgia, for the members of Congress who are continuing to try and reach a deal. They're still playing politics on this and are refusing to reach an agreement despite both sides coming together and putting together this $908 billion deal that is bipartisan for COVID relief. All of the members of Congress, particularly Senate Republicans, are pushing back on that, and that's going to hurt Americans.
Amy, what could the president have done a lot different moving on in the last several months about COVID-19, and especially now talking so much about the virus, wanting it actually to be called the Trump vaccine?
Well, if it is called the Trump vaccine, that's all to Trump's credit for Operation Warp Speed and getting the resources necessary, cutting the regulations necessary to be able to bring a safe, effective vaccine to the American people and, frankly, to the world. But I think a lot of people are still a little bit wait and see how this vaccine works. It was first used, I believe, in the UK, and you'll have those first responders and so forth, and there might be side effects that some people might not be willing to endure because they think that's worse than possibly even COVID itself, that a lot of people are COVID positive who are asymptomatic. But in terms of what could the president have done differently, I think that is kind of a ridiculous question, frankly, about a disease that we're all still learning so much about. Anthony Fauci, who's regularly quoted as a great expert, he's changed his mind many, many times on how this disease spreads, how infectious it is, how bad the infection can get, whether or not you should wear masks. Initially he said you shouldn't, and now he says that you should, and that lots of researchers are trying to get their hands on this. And news today, I was just hearing here in New York City that there's some concern that some sort of new form of this COVID-19 virus is the reason for a spike, at least here in New York City. Again, we don't know. We're still trying to get our arms around it. But I think that any president would have been confronted with a major challenge, certainly in the beginning with the fog of war and with the virus that even our most learned researchers dedicating 24/7 a day are still trying to understand.
Yeah, Erica, I want to end with you talking about this because I think everybody's been pretty clear. If you put a mask on, if you kept a safe distance, it would have done a lot to stop the spread of this. Is this going to be one of the legacies of Donald Trump, that he just simply failed to take the lead on this?
Yeah, I think it is, Sean. Unfortunately, and again, he's a friend of mine. And 2 weeks prior to the election, I had a town hall with him. I said, "What would you do differently?" And he said, "Not much." His words were "not much." And I really gave him an opportunity to show some empathy and some heart. And I wish he had done that because I think it may have changed things for him. I think he did a lot of great things, as Amy Holmes points out. The Operation Warp Speed is the reason we have a vaccine at this point. Remember, 48 hours after the election, the vaccine was announced effective. If it were 48 hours prior, you may have 4 more years of Donald Trump. So a lot of things fell against Donald Trump. But one of the things that I believe will always go down as a self-inflicted wound was the fact that it's his nature to do it, but he just could never say, you know what, I was wrong, this is bigger than I thought it was going to be, and then have that empathetic, heartfelt feeling and discussion with the American people. He just never did that, and I think that may be the thing that he looks back and says, that's the one thing I could have done differently.
Well, I'd like to thank all of our panel, Katie, Rashad, Amy, and Erica. Great conversation, a lot to cover today. I think it's going to be incredibly interesting to watch as we go forward with Bill Maher announcing he's going to resign, the vaccine kicking in, and we'll wait and see what happens on January 6th. With first Pence overseeing the Electoral College votes and, of course, that all-important runoff. That does it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Sean Caleb's here in Washington. Thanks, everyone, for being with us.